Now, this was, of course, far from the first time that Americans heard that the way our government functions is basically the opposite of the fairy tales we are taught about democratic accountability in a constitutional republic. Anyone who knows anything about how Washington really works, by definition, already knew that we live under the reign of unelected permanent power factions in Washington, who exercise unlimited power regardless of the outcome of the symbolic elections we're permitted to participate in once every 2 years by punching one of the two holes next to the same two parties. Recall that in 2013, Edward Snowden enabled us to reveal that the National Security Agency, in conjunction with the CIA and FBI, had been unconstitutionally and illegally spying on innocent American citizens, millions of them at a time, for years. Federal courts that examined those programs, once we were able to reveal them, they had previously been kept secret, concluded that they violated the Fourth Amendment's prohibition on warrantless searches and violated congressional statutes to boot. But 3 years earlier, in 2010, the Washington Post published a 3-part investigative series led by the 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner Donna Priest, entitled, quote, Top Secret America. This installment, this expose, described how the U.S. security state in the wake of 9/11 and the exploding intelligence budget it ushered in has become so sprawling and so secretive and so unaccountable that very few people have any idea what it really is doing. And that no one person, not the CIA director, nor the director of national intelligence, nor the Pentagon chief, and most certainly not the elected U.S. president, has any idea of what these agencies are really doing. The Post headline was this, quote, a hidden world, growing beyond control. The government has built a national security and intelligence system so big, so complex, and so hard to manage, no one really knows if it's fulfilling its most important purpose, keeping citizens safe. Now, just the first 2 paragraphs of the Post's first installment by itself, and I covered it at the time, but just the first 2 paragraphs should have been as enraging and alarming as Chuck Schumer's confession was on the Rachel Maddow show, and should have instantly provoked a new church committee of the kind that in 1975 revealed to Americans for the first time the true scope of the evils, horrors, and crimes committed by these agencies in the dark. Everything from gruesome drug experiments on unwitting Americans to develop mind control narcotics. That was really one of the things they discovered, to infiltration of almost every domestic political group on the left and the right, which the U.S. security state perceived as too hostile to establishment power and orthodoxies to be left alone. The Post expose began this way, quote, the top secret world the government created in response to the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 has become so large, so unwieldy, and so secretive that no one knows how much money it costs, how many people it employs, how many programs exist within it, or exactly how many agencies do the same work. These are some of the findings of a 2-year investigation by the Washington Post that discovered what amounts to an alternative geography of the United States, a top secret America hidden from public view and lacking in thorough oversight. The Post article quoted one of the most senior defense officials, in fact, the most senior one, the Secretary of Defense, to illustrate how out of control and unaccountable this entire system has become. Quote, in the Defense Department, where more than 2/3 of the intelligence programs reside, only a handful of senior officials, called super users, have the ability to even know about all the department's activities. But as 2 of the super users indicated in interviews, there's simply no way they can keep up with the nation's most sensitive work. Quote, I'm not gonna live long enough to be briefed on everything, was how one super user put it. The other recounted that for his initial briefing, he was escorted into a tiny dark room, seated at a small table, and told he couldn't take notes. Program after program began flashing on his screen, he said, until he yelled stop in frustration. Now, I know for certain that part of my audience for this show and for my journalism in general is on the right, and I know that part is on the left, and I know that part is in this undefined center. I've always prided myself on having a very ideologically diverse audience and know for sure that I still do. And I think I'm very comfortable saying that no matter where you fall on the ideological spectrum, no matter what your political perspectives are, once you learn that there is an institution or set of institutions within what is supposed to be a democratic government that operates completely in the dark and far outside of any kind of democratic accountability, a parallel government, according to the Washington Post. We should at least have our representatives in Congress launch an investigation to find out what it is that they're doing. And that's especially the case given how much we've learned just in the past 6 weeks alone about how much these agencies, Homeland Security, CIA, FBI, are deliberately insinuating themselves into our domestic politics and manipulating our political discourse and the flow of information. We learned that from a report in The Interview in late October that showed how Homeland Security had implemented a plan, part of which was the creation of that creepy disinformation czar they wanted to install as a means of insinuating themselves into the largest internet companies to dictate what can and cannot be heard on the internet. We obviously know that from the Twitter files, which we've covered extensively on this show, in part because the corporate media has deliberately ignored it. That also proves the same thing, that the FBI and Homeland Security and the CIA have their tentacles in almost every aspect of our domestic politics, something that they were never, ever supposed to do. And once you know that, in addition to everything else I just showed you, including Chuck Schumer saying everyone's petrified to criticize the CIA because they'll destroy you if you do, that should immediately settle the question of whether you believe that Congress should exercise its investigative function as it did in 1975 with the Church Committee, which is now 47 years ago, to uncover what these agencies are actually doing, to bring transparency and light to them, which is required in a democracy. Remember when the Washington Post flamboyantly changed its motto once Donald Trump was elected to "Democracy dies in darkness." Indeed it does, and there's nothing darker than the US security state. And the only way to shed light on it is through a congressional investigation. And yet, just today, the House of Representatives voted on whether to create a new subcommittee, a select committee, modeled after the January 6th committee that would have a similar budget and staff, that would be empowered to dig into these agencies, to gain access to classified information. They can't be told you're not allowed to know this because it's classified. There are representatives in Congress, they have every right to know. And this was part of the concessions extracted by the holdouts to Kevin McCarthy's speakership. It's one of the reasons why the Washington power structure was so angry with what they were doing, because part of what they were doing was demanding things that you're not supposed to do, like demanding the right to look into these security state agencies. It did pass in the House because every Republican voted for it. And at the same time, every single last Democrat, from the centrist and the right-wing Democrats to the radical squad, the people supposedly against imperialism and militarism, and the CIA, who come from left-wing politics, every last one of them voted no, in unison as they always do. It's a party completely in lockstep. So we are going to have this committee, but Democrats are vehemently opposed to investigating these agencies. They're clearly and desperately trying to shield these agencies from investigative scrutiny. It's really worth asking why. And I think the best way to understand that is just to listen to what they're saying. So let's start with the newly elected minority leader of the House Democratic Caucus, Hakeem Jeffries, who went onto Twitter today to justify why Democrats had decided to vote against this committee. I'm not sure if we can put this up on the screen, but I see it there. It says, quote, "Extreme MAGA Republicans have established a select committee on insurrection protection. We will fight it tooth and nail." Hakeem Jeffries is telling you that insurrection means trying to find out what the CIA, FBI, and NSA are doing, as if that's a war against the United States government to bring transparency to these agencies. This is what he means. And if you doubt that, listen to what every other Democrat, including Democrats and liberal media, are saying in rage over the fact that the Republicans want to do what a bipartisan committee of Congress 47 years ago did, led by liberals like Frank Church of Idaho. Listen to what they're saying about why they oppose it. Let's